Wooden piles with concrete caps are among the oldest pile systems in the world. They are displacement piles and are pile-driven. For this, VROOM Fundationstechnology uses piling rigs with a hydraulic ram. The application of wooden piles is waning, and the age-old guide system with a ram is increasingly disappearing. Out of nostalgia, and in honor of the first official pile, VROOM has an old Dutch pile-driving three-legged rig with a drop hammer. Those invited are delighted to pull on the ropes and drive the celebratory pile into the soil. With small spans, it's possible to achieve a shed floor area with a limited depth and a limited amount of reinforcement. Wooden piles are sawn to length on site. When pile driving, their geotechnical load capacity is monitored by calendaring. The top of the wooden pile has a concrete pile cap to prevent damage to the wooden pile because of the changing water table. Wooden piles are displacement piles and can be driven to depth. They are mainly used for freestanding small-scale residential construction and, in this housing project, below wooden storage areas. Pre-stressed, pre-cast concrete piles are among the first pile systems to be used after wooden piles. They are displacement piles and are pile-driven. They are suitable for almost any soil condition. VROOM Fundationstechnology uses rigs with continuously variable hydraulic drop hammers. Concrete piles are available in a large number of standard lengths and square sizes. They are used for residential, utility and infrastructure projects, but also in projects where high stress demands are placed on the piles, for example, in civil engineering, or for small projects requiring rapid, flexible realization. It involves a controlled driving process where VROOM has years of experience. The correct position of the pile is prepared based on the spile. When the pile is located under the ram, it's driven in a vertical or braced position. When pile driving, calendaring is used to determine the soil condition. During underground construction, such as cellars and tunnels, the piles can be driven from the existing ground level and then further driven in. Driven steel tube piles belong to a pile system with a long tradition. This cast-in-situ steel pile has mainly been used in restoration, renovation and foundation repair projects, for which various mini piling rigs were developed. With large piling rigs, the steel tube piles can be driven into the soil in a single length in one go. After being driven, the casing is filled with concrete and reinforcement is inserted. The casing remains in the soil. Steel tube piles can also be driven vibration-free, but more of that later. The cast-in-situ formed pile systems are displacement systems. The combination of the steel tube piles and the mini piling rigs can also be deployed for small-scale new construction and renovation. VROOM's minis are all-rounders and excellently suited for indoor work such as foundation repair. Restoration and foundation repair usually involves difficult-to-reach areas with reduced movement and limited work heights. The smallest rigs with accessories can be delivered in a single container. This mini, less than 80 centimeters wide, can be driven in via the front door. The work height determines the length of the pipe segments that can be driven. They form the tube mantle for the concrete pile. The first section of the tube pile consists of a welded shoe, which closes the tube. Gravel, in the lowest segment, transfers the impact force to the entire casing. Each subsequent segment is spot welded in the same direction in the flare, and the seam is then welded watertight. Segment after segment, the steel pipe is driven into the soil. Later, the tube is cut off and checked to see if it is clean and dry. If a small piece of reinforcement is added, then the concrete is first poured, and afterwards the reinforcement is placed at the correct height in the concrete. If the tube pile is reinforced over its entire length, then the reinforcement is already in place before being driven. Steel tubular screw piles are part of the cast-in-situ pile systems. They are displacement piles and are a vibration-free version of the in-the-tube sunken steel tube piles. For screwing activities, VROOM Fundationstechniken uses both mini and large piling rigs. This pile type was developed for projects where vibration-free and/or noise reduction was required. Displacement ensures a higher load-bearing capacity, with an additional advantage that no bore spoil emerges. With mini piling rigs, the casing is screwed into the soil segment by segment. A powerful drilling motor is used. The first segment is fitted with a special drill tip. As already mentioned, steel tubular screw piles work on a displacement basis and result in no bore spoil. Each subsequent segment is placed in the same direction in the flare and welded together. Then, the seam is welded watertight. The screwing depth is dependent on the soil condition. Later, a check is carried out to see if the casing is clean and dry. Then it's filled with concrete. Depending on the length, reinforcement is put in place before or after pouring the concrete. When there is sufficient space, the entire length of a steel tube pile can be screwed into the soil in one go by a large piling rig. These steel tube piles are also closed at the end and fitted with a special drill tip. Type HBF Vibro piles are cast-in-situ driven displacement piles. VROOM Fundationstechniken has various types of hydraulically driven piling rigs for pile driving the casing in which the concrete pile is produced. The advantages of Vibro piles comes to the fore during changing soil conditions, longer piles, or when using piles which are subjected to greater loads. The shape of the Vibro pile is based on the bearing capacity needed and soil condition. The depth of the casing to be pile driven is determined by the soil structure. Producing Vibro piles takes noise reduction into account by placing a noise-reducing sound jacket around the casing. Pre-drilling is a possible option to reduce vibration during the pile driving process. Pre-pile driving also occurs, especially at locations where there could be unexpected or large obstacles in the soil. Type HBF Vibro piles are suitable for residential projects, buildings, sewage purification plants, and infrastructure and energy sector projects. The piles can be produced relatively quickly. They are displacement piles with no outcoming associated soil. A centering jig keeps the shoe in place. The detachable base cover can be fitted with sealing tape to close the casing during pile driving. The casing is brought into the correct position above the detachable base cover and will then be pile driven. When the correct depth has been reached, the hammer is disconnected and checked whether the inside of the temporary casing is clean and dry. Then, reinforcement with spacer sleeves is fitted at the right height. With an anchor pile, reinforcement is fitted over its entire length. A concrete pouring silo is used to fill up the concrete into the casing, after which the driving hammer is again connected to the casing. When the piling rig withdraws the casing, the detachable base cover remains behind and shapes the Vibro pile in the soil. Vibro piles can always be made to the right depth. If required, a pile can be finished directly at working level. For each subsequent pile, the same casing is positioned over a new shoe and pile driven into the soil. All the type HBF Vibro piles produced by VROOM Fundationstechniken have been subjected to sonic integrity testing by an independent consultant. Vibro combi piles belong to the cast-in-situ displacement pile systems. This pile has a number of advantages over the excellent qualities of the standard Vibro pile. For example, it can handle both compressive and tensile loads. VROOM Fundationstechniken can deploy various types of hydraulically driven piling rigs, which can produce large pile lengths with large diameters. Vibro combi piles can be finished to the desired length up to several meters below ground level, and are therefore ideally suited for underground construction, for example, for parking garages and sewage purification plants. Vibro combi piles can be used from a pontoon, or such as here, transversely up to 8 meters below ground level. A Vibro Combi pile can stand large tensile loading as it consists of a pre-stressed, precast concrete core which is left behind after pile driving the casing. Factory-fitted profiles ensure a good connection between the pile head with, for example, an underwater concrete floor. It is a displacement pile system and results in no outcoming associated soil. Positioning the detachable base cover takes place in this case through a compass twist. The unattached base cover closes the casing during drive. Pile driving the casing to the required depth below ground level is a controlled process. Once at depth, the driving hammer is disconnected and checked whether the inside of the casing is clean and dry. An auxiliary crane brings the pre-stressed precast concrete pile into position, and using a lance, the pile is inserted into the casing and placed on the base cover, which is located far below the surface. The space around the feet of the precast concrete pile is filled with grout. A water column above the grout provides sufficient pressure when withdrawing the casing, ensuring the grout column with its pile remains in place and that the desired pile diameter around the feet remains intact. When withdrawing the casing, the Vibro Combi pile with the grout column and the base cover remains at the required height below the surface. For each subsequent pile, the same casing is positioned over a new detachable base cover. Vibro-SD piles belong to the cast-in-situ formed pile systems and are displacement piles. VROOM Fundationstechnology has special piling rigs available for producing this pile system. The abbreviation SD stands for silent driven and small diameters, which is typical of the production process where a pipe feeder with a small diameter is vibrated silently into the soil by means of a vibrating arm. Vibro-SD piles are ideal for floor areas with a relatively high concentration of piles aligned to the floor load. Vibro-SD piles are also used under large load-bearing floors in business premises and in soil embankments under road surfaces or runways. It is a displacement pile system, so there is no question of outcoming associated soil. VROOM Fundationstechnology has other pile systems for construction piles. The steel feeder tube in the leader is placed on the detachable base cover. Then the tube is vibrated into the soil with the help of a high-frequency, continuously variable hammer-type vibrator combined with the pull-down of the piling rig. Once the pipe feeder has reached the required depth, the concrete pump, which is in direct contact with the pipe feeder, is automatically activated. Under pre-programmed concrete pressure, the pipe feeder is then withdrawn. Concrete is continuously added under constant pressure during withdrawal. The detachable base cover stays behind. Thanks to the optimized, automated production process, the pile diameters can be controlled. Vibro-SD piles are pile-driven to the right depth and finished off at construction level. A Vibro-SD pile is suitable for a centric compressive load and is fitted with a single reinforcement bar as standard. Vibro-SD piles can be easily applied in variable soil conditions. Under specific circumstances, the pile length can be adjusted on-site. To ensure quality, Vibro-SD piles can be subjected to sonic integrity testing and evaluated by an independent consultant. DPA screw piles belong to the cast-in-situ formed pile systems and are displacement piles. VROOM Fundationstechnology uses different kinds of piling rigs which can produce large pile lengths. The abbreviation DPA stands for Drilling Push Aside. VROOM Fundationstechnology developed this pile system for the Dutch market. DPA-type screw piles offer considerable load-bearing capacity and can handle compressive and tensile loads. The application of DPA piles means the excavation site remains clean because displacement ensures there is a limited amount of bore spoil. Screw piles, cast in situ and produced vibration-free and with low noise, are a great advantage during urban renewal and other adjacent projects that are sensitive to damage through settling and/or vibration. Sealing tape in the drill tip ensures that the auxiliary tube remains dry and clean during screwing. The detachable drill tip is placed on the spile. Once it's in the correct position, it's screwed into the soil in a clockwise direction. Once the calculated depth has been reached, the screw tube is checked to see if it's clean and dirt-free. The diameter of the screw tube provides sufficient space for suspending the reinforcement cage. Reinforcement over the entire length is also possible, after which the screw tube is filled with concrete. When the screw tube is withdrawn, concrete is simultaneously poured in, which then forms the DPA pile in the soil. If required, head reinforcement can be fitted after the pile has been produced. All DPA piles can be subjected to sonic integrity testing by an independent consultant. VGS-type screw piles belong to the cast-in situ formed pile systems and are displacement piles. VROOM Fundationstechniken advises using the VGS pile especially for projects where production must take place vibration-free and/or with reduced noise. Displacement during production ensures there is less outcoming associated soil. Depending on the foundation technique and soil condition, VGS piles can be produced in great lengths. VGS piles can absorb both compressive and tensile loads. The detachable drill tip is adapted per project and adjusted to the soil geotechnical conditions. Sealing tape inside the drill tip closes the tube feeder and prevents dirt and water penetration. The drill tip is positioned at the location of the spile in the correct position. A variably adjustable hydraulic drill motor in the piling rig, combined with the pull-down force, screws the auxiliary tube to the desired depth. During production, automatic registration of the torque, pull-down power, and drill time takes place. When the screw tube has reached the desired depth, a check is carried out for dirt and water penetration in the tube feeder by means of a probe or stone. The VGS pile is usually fitted with a reinforcement cage down to the solid base. It's possible to reinforce the pile over its entire length and to suspend it at depth. The correct amount of fresh concrete is poured into the screw pile by means of a concrete pump or a concrete pouring silo. While oscillating or screwing, the auxiliary tube is withdrawn, leaving the drill tip behind. VGS piles can be produced up to ground level and be finished off at height. VGS piles can be subjected to sonic integrity testing by an independent consultant. Producing continuous flight auger piles, CFA piles, belongs to the modern cast-in-situ pile systems. VROOM Fundationstechniken applies bored concrete piles in many kinds of projects, depending on the soil condition and the foundation construction, and not just in areas with sandy soil. The pile system is soil-removing and results in bore spoil. Bored concrete piles are very rapidly produced, vibration-free and/or with reduced noise. The piles can handle both compressive and tensile loads. There is a valve on the underside which remains closed during screwing. The drill motor turns the tube clockwise in the soil. When the proper depth has been reached, the core of the tube is filled with concrete under pressure, ensuring the valve opens. The concrete is kept under pressure when the tube comes to a halt or is gently pulled clockwise to the surface. The concrete column forms in the soil. The pile is flattened off. CFA piles can be partly reinforced with a pile head reinforcement and can be fitted with a single reinforcement bar. This can be partial or along the full length. Finally, the pile head is protected with plastic to prevent contamination. Eventually, the pile head can be finished off at height with the help of a sleeve. Tubular screw piles belong to the modern cast-in-situ pile systems, and as a result of the big core, there is less outcoming soil compared to traditional augers. VROOM Fundationstechniken applies tubular screw piles in projects where a full reinforcement cage in a pile is requested. Tubular screw piles can excellently handle both compressive and horizontal loads. Tubular screw piles are produced in huge lengths and can be subjected to both compressive and tensile loads. Under certain circumstances, the piles can be immediately finished off at height. Thanks to the large core of the screw tube, these piles can be properly reinforced. A special detachable drill tip is fitted to the tube. The inside of the drill tip is fitted with sealing tape to keep the tube completely closed during screwing. The drill motor turns the tube clockwise into the soil. When the correct depth has been reached, the tube is checked to see if it's clean and dry. Longitudinal reinforcement can be applied to the entire length, giving guaranteed coverage after pile production. The core of the tube is then filled with concrete. The concrete is filled to at least the work level, after which the stationary or slightly clockwise turning tube is pulled from the soil. If required, the pile can be further finished off. VROOM Betonbouw is focused on the supply, delivery and installation of precast concrete elements for foundation constructions and carrying out construction work in traditional concrete. Precast concrete work is often available alongside pile foundation work. On request, VROOM takes care of the surveying of complete foundations and including the ground floor. With combined orders of pile foundations and precast foundation elements, the advantages of precast construction really come to the fore. After VROOM Betonbouw has delivered the entire foundation construction, the contractor can immediately begin with construction from the ground floor up. VROOM Betonbouw offers an extensive range of precast foundation elements. What started with the provision of foundation beams was soon expanded, also retaining walls, channel rib cassette, and slab floors, basement and the pedestal footings and plinths for this noise barrier were part of this speciality. Precast concrete construction improves efficiency in the construction process as well as benefiting the dimensional stability and constant quality. The costs of failure at the building site are reduced and construction is considerably faster. VROOM Betonbouw cooperates and responds to specific wishes. Besides standard horizontal recesses, other specifications are also possible. Business premises floors can be fitted with a recess for upward brickwork. Before fitting the precast elements, a rebar is first fitted to the pile head. Then, with the help of a sleeve, the pile head is fitted to the top. Then follows the provision of foundation beams. The beams are fixed with mortar. And finally, the floor elements can be placed. VROOM Betonbouw designs precast concrete elements produced under controlled conditions and supplied with a COMO certificate. Precast construction ensures optimal working conditions. Normally, 2 installers can assemble the elements. VROOM Betonbouw is frequently involved early in projects, such as here at sequential housing. VROOM is also active in utility buildings, road and hydraulic engineering. And for this particular noise barrier, the first precast concrete piles were pile-driven, followed by the precast pedestal footings and plinths. Driving the first pile is still a special ritual. When the VROOM Old Dutch pile driving 3-legged rig with a drop hammer for wooden piles is deployed, it contributes to the festivities. For special occasions, VROOM Fundationstechnology rent out a miniature of the authentic pile driving 3-legged rig. VIPs like pulling the proverbial strings and thus drive, in the original Old Dutch way, a pile into the ground. By means of the ram, the Old Dutch 3-legged piling rig is fitted with a so-called wooden test pile for the part that is to be pile-driven. The deployment of the Old Dutch piling rig includes pile-driving frame construction and expert guidance. VROOM Fundationstechnology. Our drive guarantees your support.